We are absolutely delighted to have you as our keynote speaker, Deb Nicholson.
Hello.
Can I call you Deb? Yeah?
Of course, yes.
Okay, your journey in the technology field has taken you to conferences and events around the world. When you first start working in technology, did you ever imagine that your career will lead you to such global engagement?
Yeah, it's interesting because before I worked in technology, I worked at a local nonprofit that worked on local issues very close to my home. So like at most we would maybe take a bus to go to some other event. And then as I started looking at issues of like access and who gets to like be in charge of what happens and what happens to us and where all that goes, like I started thinking a lot about how technology impacts that. And then I was like, oh, I'll work at the FSF for a while. And then they said, oh, we always get invited to these events, but it's kind of like, oof, you know, it was a office of a lot of introverts. And I was like, oh, I'll try an event. And I went and it was like, I met some people. They want to mail us a server. Like I got rid of all the t-shirts and like they gave me like, I have like $300 in cash. And like, you know, it was that good. And they're like, oh, do you maybe want to go to more of these for us? Because that's not usually how it has been going. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, sure. And so while I was at the Free Software Foundation, I got my passport for the first time. I had never been, except for Canada, like out of the US. And the first conference I went to out of the country was Forum International Software Livre, which is in Porto Alegre in Brazil. So I tried to learn a little Portuguese to talk about free software. But I was there to do the booth. Like I hadn't yet thought I would be on the stage with the speakers, you know, so that took a little longer. But I did do a lightning talk at that conference. Like I met the Python Brazil community was really, really friendly, and like they could tell we didn't know anybody, and like they took us under their wing and they're like, we'll take you to dinner, we'll show you like where to get the good coffee and all of that kind of stuff. And they're like, would you do a lightning talk for us? So that was probably the first time I spoke in front of an audience at a technical conference.
And I'm just guessing, like your mind start to open and evolve, and not just like the office, that you start to evolve not maybe inside, but also everything outside to start to evolve. How did you feel about that?
Yeah, it's really like going from having like a very local impact and like a very short like kind of circuit of like people you talk to, and then be like, oh, like the whole world is using software and they're building it together and they want to talk about it together. Like there's so many places to go. So so that's been really exciting, and I love meeting new people. I love like trying like whatever the local specialty is, and like learning like, you know, what people love about the place they live and what they're like, oh, this part is a little weird, you know, and what their communities are like. It's just so it's a real like amazing opportunity to like learn more about the world we live in.
I'm guessing that is fulfilling.
Yes.
Amazing. It's wonderful to have you here in Colombia for PyCon Colombia 2023. How has your experience been so far? How do you feel about being part of this event?
This has been really great. Like one thing I would say, if anyone is thinking about coming to PyCon Colombia in a future year, it is a very welcoming event. Like the organizers, they know as a keynote I'm coming from outside the country, my Spanish is only okay. They've taken really good care of me and made sure like, oh, we have this plan for you, where you don't have to like go stumbling around in the dark for breakfast. Like we got you, and so it's been really great to work with the organizers and a really positive experience.
I suppose that you will come in the future?
I hope so. There are a lot of PyCons, and I do like I'm starting to get some more requests. But I also still have work I need to do that's not go to every PyCon. So eventually, but I can't promise every year. I can't. If I came to every PyCon every year, that would be a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Also, I remember in the PyCon US, they give you a huge list about the PyCon conference. Then, yeah, I suppose that could be a little bit challenging.
But I have other staff members that were very jealous. They're like, going to Colombia this weekend? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, oh. I'm like, I'll let them know we got other people in the office that want to come. So
that's amazing. In Colombia, we are actively working to promote and increase the participation of women in the STEAM fields. For instance, we collaborate with Django Girls and Pi Ladies for this edition of PyCon Colombia. What advice would you give to women who are aspiring to enter the tech world? Like in the first part of the question.
Yeah, it's so it can feel a little daunting. I would say first try to find like a community. I mean, Python's a very good example. I don't say don't get into tech if you're not going to do Python, but try to find a friendly piece of the community, because you're going to have a lot of questions, and it's not all in the book, it's not all in the class. Some of it is like, oh, what are some of the trends? Like, what kinds of places are hiring, and what kinds of places are nice to work? And you need a network for that. So find a couple friendly people, try out a local meetup, and then when you're like, oh, that was weird, or I didn't know if this was a good idea or a bad idea, you'll have some people to ask.
Yeah, I'm totally agree. Then, like, for example, I wanna like talk for myself. I'm not like in the tech area. I'm like in the environmental area. And what's that? Friendly people that invite me and support me to start to develop in this area, and that's amazing. Additionally, what advice do you have for community leaders who aim to foster diversity and inclusion within their communities?
Yeah, so I would say that communities that are pushing diversity and inclusivity from the top are going to be a lot more effective. It's very hard to bring it from the bottom if the top, like the leaders in your community, are not on board. The other thing that I would say is then once you maybe have this great thing where you're like, oh, the person in charge is like 100%, is to keep in mind that in order to work towards equity, it means like spending some money on diversity. Like you can say like, I like diversity, and that's nice, but it's not as good as like, I'm willing to fund diversity. And in order to even things out in less than, 4 or 5 generations, like we have to put down some money where we're talking here.
Yeah, like about the talk, like the Pi Ladies talk, that they told us that just maybe 4 people was about that's part of diversity. Then we need to maybe put more support about that.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that like, so, and I think sometimes people feel like that sounds unfair, and it's like, oh, but men have been getting that support, and it's funded. It's just like kind of built in, so it's like a little less visible. It's like, oh, you already have a leader, you already have a mentor or an advocate, and someone who will look up to you, and someone, or like bring you in and bring you along, and to create that opportunity and make sure that women can come and be at the events where they can meet people who will help them. We have to put in money.
Yeah, totally agree. Then, as the executive director of the Python Software Foundation, could you please share the mission of the PSF and your vision in that future? For its future, pardon.
Yeah, so our mission is to promote and protect the Python programming language. And so that means we provide all the infrastructure for both the CPython and the PyPI, the packaging index. And that itself is its own, it's a lot. and then on top of that, we are also working to grow and diversify the global Python community. So those are like, it's like the code and then also the people, right? So for the code, we are always looking for ways to like optimize, maybe get it to pay for itself a little bit more. The infrastructure is not cheap, and to like also be doing a good job of making sure there are enough people around and enough knowledge that we can always continue to keep running things the way that they should be run. For the diversity piece, one of the things that I think a lot about is like who is on the edges of our community now, but doesn't really feel like they're part of the community. And some of that is like, you know, people who maybe go to the Python meetup but would never think of coming and spending the whole weekend at an event, or things like that. So those folks are obviously part of our community. They're at a Python meetup. But one of the things that I also found interesting is I talked to people who work in another field, but they use Python like every day at work. And they're like, oh, but I'm not a Python programmer. I'm like, you use it every day. And they're like, oh, yeah, sure. But like, okay, so I feel like we have maybe an invisible bubble where those folks don't feel like they are part of our community, and that means that maybe in the long term, they don't know that they can propose changes in, or propose additions, or write libraries that they share. And so I want to kind of bring more of the people who are in at our edges, like so that they're like, oh, okay, maybe I'm not a Python programmer, but I did write a PEP and I wrote this library or whatever. It's like, okay, like you can call yourself whatever you want, but if there's an improvement you want, I hope that you know that like there's a path to take for suggesting that.
I'm suppose that you are like looking for the balance between code and people, but also inside of the community of Python, search that balance. That is not so easy.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think like it's even what we are doing as focused as the Python community is on the people. We live in this backdrop where like tech is like so focused on the code, like almost to the exclusion of everything else. Like, you know, it's like even Catherine said in her talk yesterday, like, oh, all these plugins for SQL wrappers and like some are great and some are, I wish you had written docs. And it's like, the docs are really important, but there are a lot of other things that are really important. It's that connection between the people using the software and the people writing it. Like when you lose that, it comes like you write some weird stuff, or like, you know, like you can't make like a gift for someone you don't know, right?
And because you don't know what to give and you don't know how to build that people needs.
Right. Yeah, and there are a lot of like terrible, sad stories of like NGOs like dropping something into a community and they're like, I didn't want this. Nobody wanted this. And they're like, oh yeah, we thought of it like way over here. We thought it would be nice for you, you know, and it's like, so I don't want that. I want to make sure that we have that good connection and that good balance where it's like our users are, you know, they're always in our mind when we're writing code.
Yeah, I understand. Then your enthusiasm for open source software is evident. What draws you to open source?
Yeah, so it's I used to work on civil liberties and access to the political process. That's the work that I did locally in Massachusetts, where I live, and just like I feel very strongly that like there's so much going on, and it just feels like you can't always like say, oh, I don't want to share this, or I don't want to participate in that, or I don't want my information at this company or that thing, or like I don't want this device that I bought and brought into my house to do this thing to me, like where it's maybe tracking information or talking to the company that I bought it from. And it's like technology is so integral to our lives. The idea of having no control over it and just feel like, YOLO, I guess, like, just, have everything. It's like, feels so sad to me because in my mind, like, the promise of technology, like when you read all those people in the 60s that were like, creating startups and hot tubs in California, and they're like, oh, we're gonna like multiply the power of the human mind. We're all going to be like supercomputers, and like it's going to be like so empowering and amazing. And I'm like, where did we lose that? I wish we could like let's just like roll back a little bit, and like, what if we thought of computers and technology and like devices that have software on them, as opposed to like, well, you got to have one and you got to accept that they're going to just sell your email to like 1,000 other people that you don't want to hear from. What if we could flip it back and be like, no, I paid for it, I can change it, I want to be in charge of my relationship to it. And that means like talking to people about code, it means talking to people about technology, and it means making sure that more people and more kinds of people coming from different backgrounds and experiences are able to be part of the process that creates technology.
Yeah, I think and I feel that sometimes the people moves from this, like are afraid about information and share information, but also because it's a lot of work start to share information in the right way. Then probably that will be really challenged, but you can do it. Like for me, that all the open source, like that information is a lot of work, but also it's amazing because it's work building for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Also, I want to ask you about what tips or recommendations do you have for individuals who want to contribute to open source projects?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same as like what I had for women. For anyone, like find a friendly community, find some people that are doing something that seems like you care about, So like if you, if you don't care about like sales leads, then that's maybe not going to be a fun place to plug in. But if you care a lot about, like, say, the space program, there are places like where people are doing like citizen space stuff. Like, if that's something that really motivates you, like, then get into that community. It's like adding code to it doesn't automatically make it interesting to you. So find something that's interesting to you already, and then figure out what people are doing around it with code.
Yeah, looking for the space and the right people.
Yeah.
Amazing. Considering your expertise in open source, do you have any insight or idea about the future of open source tools that you would like to share with us?
I mean, that's such a big...
Yeah, such a huge picture.
Yeah, I guess, like, so instead of answering, like, in the specific, I would think about, like, looking at the big picture aggregate. And I think, like, Python is pretty well situated for this. Like, I think now we use tools a little more siloed than we could in the future, and I would love to see, more tools getting reused in places that you didn't think of. I mean, this already happens in open source. Like you make a database, and you make it for a veterinarian's office, and then somebody's like, I'm going to build a dating app with it, and you're like, all right, whatever. But I think we'll see more things getting reused, and I think as we grow more tools, it will. My hope is that it creates more like kind of movability for the individual. So like if you start with something, you're like, maybe you were doing space stuff and you're like, yeah, this is really cool, but I think what I liked about it was the data. Maybe I want to use the data now to look at fish, or and then you do that for a while, and then maybe you meet someone who's like, oh, I'm an artist and my thing is fish. And it's like, oh, okay, let's make some weird art about fish. And, so like being like, I want to see all the tools talk to each other and like, make good, fun, like cross silo stuff, like more of that, like empowering, like the mind and such. So that's what I would like to see as the future of tools in open source.
I think also we are kind of leading the future. If we think in that way, that right now we are building our future in open source tools and anything, like in any space that we are looking for, we are living and building our future right now. I think it's also a good spot to start.
Right. So like instead of thinking about like what is the future of open source tools that they are building, it's like what is the future of open source that we want? Let's go build it.
Now let's go to know you a little bit.
Okay.
Do you have any hobbies or interesting outside of the tech world?
Yeah, I do. I like to cook. My staff knows this because we did a retreat, and I was like, I'll just make breakfast every day at our staff retreat. But yeah, I like to cook. I sing. I play in a band. I've been in a couple bands that it took a while to find a new group after the pandemic part, and I actually used to book bands because. Boston, where I live, is very close to New York, and like bands would skip Boston because they didn't know who to talk to, and like especially like weirder, like kind of maybe noisy or arty. And I was like, oh wait, I saw that you're coming to New York. Like, we'll set you up on the Tuesday. Like, come to Boston. So I've done a lot of that. Sometimes like art projects, my partner and I did this project during the pandemic where we were like drawing postcards for people, like by picking words out of a jar and then trying to draw the postcards. So yeah, so I like to draw, I like to cook, I like music. We garden a little.
Amazing. I think it's a balance between like things that you can do by yourself, like cook or draw, and also things that you are like with another people that maybe when you need like socialize, maybe.
Yeah.
And you're in a band. That's amazing. Then how do you manage to maintain a good work-life balance in your life?
Yeah, so I think like one of the things that's always interesting about nonprofits is that you're building something that doesn't exist yet, and so that means that there's like not like you might have a roadmap, but that might not stick to the time frame that you thought. And I think that like in tech, if you say like, oh, like we're gonna do the new release in March, and then like February comes and you're like, oh no. And so then everyone's like, all right, no one's sleeping. And I'm like, oh, no. We don't have to import that on the nonprofit side. We can be honest with our community and say like, hey, we said we were going to do 6, it's going to be 3, and the other 3 are coming later this year. And so I think it's okay to say, especially if you're like, we learned something, this takes a lot longer than we thought, or like, we thought this was going to be who we needed to talk to, and then we learned like there was a whole group of people that we needed to talk to before that, so it's taking longer. And I think you have to be willing to accept that sometimes you won't hit the deadline you thought you were going to hit when you didn't know anything, and say like, yeah, we're no longer going to hit that deadline.
I think that sometimes we forgot that we are human beings and things happens and things that we don't have in mind. Then I really appreciate, because for me, for example, it's kind of hard like find this work-life balance.
Yeah.
But when you realize that, just be honest with everyone and say, pardon, I couldn't for I don't know any reason. Is really an amazing advice.
Yeah, it's so important. It's like I think like if we are trying to change the world, right? Like, which is kind of what I think we're doing. We can't do it without like talking to them. So if if you're it goes back to talking to the people you're building it for. But if you're like, oh, I have this great new idea for like whatever, promoting Python, and everybody's like, oh, no one cares about that. Like I'm going to use some hackneyed jokes from a TV show I saw 10 years ago that nobody else has watched. And it's like, oh, I just emerged from my cave to let you know that I haven't been paying attention. And so it's really important, I think, when you're doing mission-based work, and if you want to grow the community, to sort of like be part of the community, and not just the community that's already here, like the wider human community.
That's amazing. With the emergence of the new AI generative code tools like CoPilot, what are your thoughts on the impact on the development of open source project?
Yeah, so the CoPilot is interesting because I think it could have been done a little more smoothly, like the collection of all that stuff that CoPilot was trained on, especially since some of it's under a copyleft license. So like, was that totally okay for them to suck in and then not share, but the upside for the Python community, we're not under a copyleft license, and one of our main goals is to make things like good for beginners and learning coders, and we have heard that a lot of people find using CoPilot helpful, especially when they're new to Python. So it would be excited to see like that, and maybe the piece that is missing is like, okay, like how, like if you engaged with CoPilot, like how do we meet the person who's maybe only friend that knows Python is GitHub? Like how do we bring them over, and like if you had a more complicated question, there are a few human beings that you could also connect with. So I guess that's our challenge, is to figure out how to like make sure people know that that like they can get more help after they use the AI from human beings.
I think that is one of the challenges that you find on the way, that on the path from the people that is starting and beginning in all the programming, and also in Python programming.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I guess there's a whole discussion of like, how much, like, how many shortcuts should you take while you're learning? Because eventually you might get to a place where, like, having taken the shortcut, you'll be like, oh no, there's something I should have learned that would be really helpful here. So I don't know, I guess like it is, but I think that's going to always happen with self-taught learners, and we have a lot of self-taught Python programmers. Yeah. And so, again, I guess the answer is connect with the community. So like if you only know one data structure, like you should make a friend that might suggest a few more for you. Yeah. And it happens when you first start. You're like, oh, this one's working really good for me. Like I'm just going to use it for everything. And it's like, you should go to your local meetup and make some friends, and they can suggest other stuff for you.
I think the community changed your mind. Like yes. For me, the community changed my mind. I think this is one of the part of all the puzzle that you need to, like, is required to be.
Yeah, yeah.
Then lastly, when you received the invitation to be a keynote speaker at the PyCon Colombia, how did you feel?
It was actually a very nicely worded invitation, because so last year I had been at the PSF for maybe like 2 weeks, and I was still getting Eva's email forwarded to me, and I got a request like, hey, we're like, Eva, do you want a keynote? And it was like, oh, it's not Eva anymore, but I can get her new email to you. And I don't know if she did it, but I was like, oh, okay. And then when I got it this year, it was like, not only like, oh, we know you're the new executive director, it was like, oh, we know all of your history and your career in open source, and we'd be really excited. And I was like, oh, okay, how could I possibly say no to that? So and then I talked to a couple of board members like, oh, have you been to PyCon Colombia? How was it? Because sometimes people are really nice, and then you get there and there's like 18 people, and it's like, oof, I don't know if this was worth 2 7-hour flights, but but the energy here is palpable. It's a huge packed room. Like everyone is lovely, and other folks from the community that have come said the same thing. They were like, lots of enthusiasm, really great community. They're going to take awesome care of you. Like, highly recommend. So I was like, all right, well, the invitations seem good. Everybody else's experience has been great. So yeah, I'm really glad to be here.
Amazing. What was your initial reaction to being given this opportunity?
Yeah, well, we did kind of, talk about that. But the other thing that I thought was interesting is sometimes you get invited for a keynote and it's like 15 or 20 minutes. And so you guys are letting me do a whole hour, which is like, all right, like,
I have time.
You asked for it. Awesome.
That's amazing. I'm really glad to you be here. Like, it's awesome. I saw you in the PyCon US, and I couldn't imagine that I found you here and talk with you here, and it's a honor for me. Then thank you, Dev, and I hope see you again here. Maybe not the next one, but in the future.
We gotta share it around a little bit.
That's amazing. I love it. And probably I will love to see you the next year if I can go to the next PyCon. Yes.
That would be awesome.
Then thank you.
Thank you.